Welcome everyone. I'm Professor Damien Blake. I'm the head of school for our School of Education, and we are so pleased to see so many people here tonight, including alumni and special guests and interested people as well. So we're very keen to hear what our panel has to say, and we'll look more into that in a few minutes. But we know that it's probably typical of a School of Education to organise something on a Friday afternoon, and no one goes until the bell goes. All right, we'll organise that. So, but look, before I go any further, I'd just like to introduce Professor Simon Tormey, who's our Executive Dean for our Faculty of Arts and Education, just to welcome us and give us some context. So, thanks, Simon.
Didn't say anything about context.
Yeah.
We're in the building, that's right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Simon Tormey. I'm the Dean of the Faculty, and my great pleasure to welcome you to Deakin Downtown. For those of you who haven't been here before, this is our sort of corporate hub. So we don't actually do any teaching here. We hold events like this, and there are a lot of kind of offices that people can use for various meetings and so on. But it's very handy, as you'll no doubt appreciate, people coming in from Southern Cross or from other parts of Melbourne to get here. And it's a genuine pleasure for us to host you. I think alumni events are beautiful events. We get to see people who've been part of the School of Education in the past. And my first question for you, how many people actually went on to be teachers in here? So quite a lot. So not everyone, but about a good half. And you have my great commiserations, the joy of teaching. My other half is a teacher not too far from here. Is an incredibly demanding, stressful job, very important, obviously, always in the headlines, always something that my wife's always bringing something home about changes of policy or just an increasing demands on time or whatever. So my heart goes out to you. I mean, we are kind of teachers as well, albeit at university level, so we're sharing that great vocation. But I do want to say we are incredibly proud, and I speak here as member of the exec of the School of Education. As you guys will know, but it's a constant source of delight for us as a university to have probably the number one School of Education in Australia. It's the largest, but it also features in most of the QS and international global rankings as if not the strongest, and one of the strongest schools of education. And it's fulfilling that incredibly important national need to prepare teachers for the most important thing that we can be doing as a nation for our citizens, is prepare them for future life. So it is a great feat, a great honour for me to be up here welcoming you to this School of Education alumni event. Without any further ado, we should acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. We're in Wurundjeri country here, in what I am learning to call Naarm, the Indigenous word for Melbourne. We also want to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and of course a particular welcome to anyone who has First Nations heritage. Just to note as well, Deakin takes its responsibilities for Indigenous and First Nations affairs very seriously. Last week we had our Indigenous oration downtown in Federation Square, fantastic event with theme music, dance, speeches and so on. Really important for us as a national institution as well as a Victorian one to demonstrate a great affinity for and care and responsibility for Indigenous peoples. So genuinely anyone with First Nations background, you're particularly welcome as well. So without any further ado, I also want to say a huge thanks to our speakers, who are very busy people, and to share their thoughts with us this afternoon. I really enjoyed last year's event when we had school principals and practitioners and researchers coming to tell us about what really giving us a really good feel for what it's like in the world of education at the moment. It's very valuable for a mere political scientist like myself to get a kind of feel for what's going on in the field. So very much appreciated. Very much appreciate the efforts of the School of Education to put this event on, albeit Friday afternoon. Why not Friday afternoon? It's a time when many of us are actually got the time to come along, and also to our Deakin Downtown staff putting on a fantastic event here as well. So really enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Do take an opportunity to mingle and network and enjoy a drink with us at the end. But back to you, Damien, to introduce our speakers. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Simon. So I'd like to introduce our panellists for today. we are very appreciative. I mean, who was it who said there's nothing quite as good as a good idea whose time has come? Was that Viktor Frankl or whoever it was? I think it was, but I should know my quotes beforehand. I think if there was a good idea whose time has come, it is the notion around trauma-informed and strength-based practice. I mean, if there was a time that we needed it any more, it's certainly not obvious for me, but certainly from what we hear in our schools and our school communities and our school leaders and our teachers and our graduates, there's definitely a need for a serious conversation about this and how we better prepare and support our teachers in our schools to do that work and the work that Simon refers to as well. So our guest speakers today include Dr. Tom Brunzel, who is the Director of Berry Street Education Model and Honorary Fellow at the University of Melbourne, hopefully Honorary Fellow at Deakin University soon too, but perhaps. He presents internationally on transforming school culture through trauma-informed practice, student and staff wellbeing, and effective leadership. So welcome, Tom. So our guests are going to come up and sit up here in a minute. I'd also like to welcome Deb Gibson. Deb is the principal of Doveton College, a diverse learning community in Melbourne southeast with over 20 years experience in educational leadership. She integrates education and health services to create inclusive environments where all students can thrive. The Berry Street Education Model is central to her school's approach across all sectors. And I'd also like to welcome Nadia Villalonga, who is a Centre Director at Oak Hill Family Centre and a proud Deakin alumnus. She studied our Deakin Graduate Certificate of Education Trauma Responsive Education. And as a leader, trauma responsive education has become her keen area of interest in the work that she does in her centre and supporting her children, particularly children who have experienced trauma. So let's please give a very warm welcome to our guests who, if you'd like to come up and take the hot seat. Now, was never good at being a game show host or anything like that, but I guess those skills would have come in handy right now. But look, we have a couple of questions that we're hoping we can explore with each of our panel members. So I'll just read through those questions, but we can adapt them. So we're keen to hear your perspectives on each of those questions. And as we said, trauma-informed practice its time has come, but not just here and there, it's come on scale. But it begs the question, what is trauma? What are we talking about when we talk about trauma? Tom, what's your take on trauma?
That's a keynote and thesis question, Damien. But I'll distill this into a bit of a bite-sized chunk for you. I think we can all agree that childhood today is not the childhood that we grew up in, and that the young people and the children that we're serving are managing in-person identities, online identities, economic compression, and then we think about our Australian children. 72% of our children and us have experienced at least one adverse childhood experience. I'm not saying 72% of us are traumatized. I'm saying that left unmanaged, we will seek support in helpful and unhelpful ways. And so my teachers in here, you know that you're doing the best you can. And you also know that you have children who are experiencing stress overload. They're also experiencing loneliness. They're experiencing peer pressure that is sometimes unhelpful. I also am aware that we are in a school of education, not necessarily a school of social work or clinical care. And I am married to a social worker, so I am very aware of my boundary as an educator. So if we were in a school of health, I would suggest that trauma-informed practice is much, much deeper in terms of the way that a clinician, and the clinicians I work with, Berry Street, work with families. As a teacher person, and I was a teacher for many years in the Bronx and a school leader in Harlem before moving to Australia 15 years ago, I am very clear that what I need to do in the classroom is not do therapeutic work with one person with another child, but I am managing 25 people at once. I'm trying to understand how to increase self-regulation, relational capacity, and see these children as having strengths, because there are moments when they feel well and do well, but those moments can feel very tiny sometimes. So what we're doing with teachers is teaching them, look, there are reasons that children are meeting their needs in unhelpful ways in the classroom, but we can increase self-regulation, we can increase relationship capacities, we can increase strengths. And finally, before I pass it to my friend Deb, I'm going to be very careful with my language today because I know from so many teachers we support, it can feel like real time when a teacher says, oh, this kid has naughty behavior, bad behavior, tricky behavior. Those are real things. We're pragmatic people. But I'd like to suggest to us, and please pass this on, that we like the words helpful and unhelpful behavior, because we can agree that it is not helpful for a third grade fistfight to break out on soccer pitch at recess. That is very unhelpful. But I also want you to pass this on, that same impulse to protect oneself, that is what a child may need in their time outside of school. Especially at Berry Street, I have the privilege of working with a fleet of clinicians and the country's largest family violence support teams. And we know that those defense mechanisms are really important sometimes for the child to maintain their own resilient selves. So that's a opening salvo, but I pass it to Deb.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Tom. Deb, your perspective from Doveton.
Yeah, would you not? Like, who wants to go straight after Tom? So what he said, plus, I guess what I'd add to that is in this, what is trauma and what does it look like? We also have to remember that the teachers in our classroom, the support staff in our classrooms are people too, with some of those childhood experiences themselves. So the work that we do in trauma-informed practice for our kids is also really helpful for our staff and for the adults and families. And I think that's the unintentional but super bonus in this work, is the benefit that it has for all the grown-ups in the piece as well.
Wonderful. And Nadia, your thoughts from the context of early childhood education?
Well, I think in early childhood, children aren't even aware of the trauma that they've experienced. So it's up to us as educators and, teachers in that space to make an environment where it's safe, predictable for them to want to come in every day, because their world's been so unpredictable as such. So, and it looks different. Trauma may look different. You've got the variety of traumas that these children have dealt with. It could be, a simple thing or an ongoing trauma that it continues. And I suppose in the service that I work at, it looks different in each family as well. So depending on if I've got children that have come out of home care as well, that looks different on how we respond to that child, to that family, and how that would look in the environment as such, I think. So, yeah.
And the thing that we know quite well now and have known for a couple of years is there's a continuing shortage of teachers. And, much of that linked to teachers' ability to make a difference in those communities and the reasons why they came into teaching in the first place. But a lot of that perhaps linked to a lack of skills and knowledge and capabilities that they need. Nadia, whilst you've got the mic there, how is a trauma-informed response, strength-based response, informing what you do and the people in your community do as educators and teachers?
I think as a leader, it's really essentially my educators and my team will look up to me for help. So they would say, what do I need to support this child? What do I need to have focus on it? So I think it's really there then, okay, let's put our lens on, let's put what we've learnt, let's put what we know essentially and say, okay, let's look at not the behaviours, but what's causing those behaviours. What are those triggers essentially first to support the educators and their wellbeing to be able to support the child and show up as well. So, yeah.
Deb, your view. How is trauma-informed practice and strength-based shaping the work of the teachers at Doveton?
So at Doveton, we have an early learning centre and go through to year 9, and this is a great opportunity for us to build a lot of institutional knowledge about our children and families, because some of our kids have started with us when they're 6 months old and they're still there when they're 15. So that's a lifetime for those kids of benefiting from a consistent approach from our educators and educators staff all the way through. So having a common language that we can share with children and with their families, having that strength-based approach, using language like helpful and unhelpful, talking about, having repair conversations and helping not just kids understand how important that is, but families as well. We have the opportunity to do that across a number of years and across those 3 sectors of education. Like, that's a privilege and a unique opportunity, but some fabulous benefits, because this work in trauma-informed practice is not about fixing young people and fixing their problems, because it's deep and long work, So it's about doing the work over time. We have that unique opportunity to work with the same children and families over a longer period. But certainly we can see the benefits through consistent practices, that consistent language. For me, the real fundamental here is unconditional positive regard for the children that we're working with, but for the families, for each other, for all the adults in the piece. And that's a really big part of our practice, is unconditional positive regard. We talk about it quite explicitly and openly as always being one of our enabling strategies, but also an absolute fundamental in our work. And so when it becomes part of the culture, you're on your way to being inclusive around, people who might have a lot of unmet needs and a lot of unhelpful behaviours, but also those that just have a few. So all of these things are going to be do no harm to anybody. They're going to help a lot of kids, and then at the pointy end, they're going to be absolutely essential for those few.
No, this is incredible, isn't it? Even hearing how the language that we use shapes the way we understand, what's happening in our communities. Tom, what would you add?
I want us to remember that every kiddo is doing the best they can. They're doing the best their bodies will allow. And so much of our work is helping educators understand that the kid is not going to fix their own behavior based on a better choices lecture or a threat of punishment. I do care a lot about fair consequences. My attachment-aware self would say we need to be safe haven and secure base. But I also want everyone in here to remember that some kiddos do not see the world as good and safe for themselves. That's one definition we use of trauma at Berry Street, that we say, yes, there's adversity, but the impacts on us as people is if you are dysregulating and you don't have control over your own stress responses or your own strategies, you're not going to feel that the classroom is there to catch you. And so what we're after is the rhythmic classroom, that there's a time that we come in, that time we come out, and something that I'm so proud to be on the stage with these two fine folks, but also I've known Deb for, 8 years now, a long time. We've been working in Doveton for a long time. That what we're after is a sense of rhythm in the school, everyone working together. So from drop-off to footpath to locker to reading and getting ready to learn, that can be reconceptualized as rhythm. And so we want to echo the rhythm of the beating, regulating heart rate with strategy after strategy after strategy for children to fall into teachers' rhythms. Finally, I have a few challenges for my teachers in here. We have grown tired of the word relationship. And I say that very instigatory because when I came to Berry Street in Australia a long time ago, I feel like a first sort of version of trauma-informed education was build the relationship, build the relationship. And of course, we believe in a relational pedagogy, that these are young people who have not yet experienced what it means to feel a sense of healthy rhythm and healthy relational action. But at the Berry Street School, if you want to check this out, we have 4 campuses of the Berry Street School in Shepparton, Narre Warren, Ballarat, and Morwell, that we've known for years that if you just say to your peers, build the relationship, then everyone defines that in their own way. And the teachers I work with say, well, I know what their favorite pizza topping is. I know what their favorite pop stars are. I know what they like to do on Tuesdays with their friends. I have a relationship, right? But when we ask them to do higher order maths problems, suddenly game over. and the kid doesn't want to do it. So I've talked to a lot of my youth workers and teachers off cliff saying, am I a bad relational actor? And we're like, no. What we needed to do is redefine what a relationship is for learning. That learning requires you to manage your stress, to behold yourself in a vocabulary word I like, the window of tolerance. Like, learning is stress. Stress is good. Stress primes us to perform. But these kiddos are learning to be afraid of their bodies and afraid of the stress. So my definition of relationship, and I'm giving you a freebie, if you're a leader in here, I want you to write the word relationship on a board and ask your staff, how do you define this? And the correct answer is, if I'm a teacher, I'm going to define relationship for learning as, get ready, attachment, attunement, co-regulation, using body and tone in really helpful ways, giving fix-it feedback, seeing this kid's strengths, and using unconditional positive regard. So that is what we've been doing at places like Doveton, and that's the big promise that we get to start sharing with Deakin students.
Wonderful. Thank you. We better make sure we delete that phrase from any of our unit guides. So I'm sure we don't have any. But look, and I was going to pick up too, Tom, the point about the point about the Better Choices lecture. It didn't work with any of my own kids, all four of them. So, and they're still making good choices or bad choices or whatever. But I think you've really challenged us there with a couple of key items to think deeply about the way we frame and think about trauma, and then the way we think about relationship. So if we expand a little bit further to think about systems and starting to think about barriers, what sort of barriers are there to doing this on a more of a whole school approach, or building communities that have greater consistency in that approach? Because much of what you're talking about there, building a rhythm relies on the community of people working together. What are the barriers?
I'd like us all to consider two. Values. Values align us. And in my research, we track CTE, collective teacher efficacy. I know some of my friends in here would know what that is very well. For you're new to CTE, collective teacher efficacy is when every single staff member, as a group of caring educators, shares values toward equity and student achievement. It's not enough just to say we have the same value set. We all believe in respect. We all believe in kindness. Those are good values. But we want to aim those values toward the lighthouse that every single child in our school can achieve, which is why we've invested so much time in Doveton College. Because that CTE, as we've been tracking CTE at Doveton, it is something that holds Doveton together. It's something that binds them together. So I would say the massive leap for a whole group of staff to align what they want to do and believe that every single child can achieve, that's called high expectations. That's one thing. And I'm going to pass it to Deb real quickly. The second barrier in our work is time. That we know that schools are doing a zillion things at once, and they have to. I get nervous when my own staff say, do we have to do another thing? Do we have to learn trauma-informed practice and social-emotional learning and positive behavior support and repair and restoration practices? And the answer is yes, because that's what our schools are asking us to do now, because that's what the children need now. But Deb, what are some of the barriers?
We were talking about this coming in, and with respect to the Early Childhood Centre, I honestly, we have not had a barrier in the introduction there at all. We've had absolute take-up from the staff, absolute embracing it because it makes sense. The fundamentals around the strategies and the understanding behind that just makes so much sense. So we've taken a very educative approach, like what is trauma-informed practice, what is trauma, how does it manifest, what does that look like? Let's understand it. And armed with that understanding, what are the strategies we can put in place? So makes perfect sense. And I think in that early childcare sector, there was certainly my team were really looking for a systemic way of doing that and a consistent way. And because their colleagues in the school had already done that work, there were great conversations. and the opportunity to have real continuity of learning with the children across that transition from, kinder into school. School sector slightly different. So when we first introduced Berry Street, everybody said, oh my God, there's no time. There's no time. How are we going to do Berry Street lessons? Because we always have to do maths, English and blah, 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 and you want us to do this and you want us to do that. And the big change for us was when we said, we're not asking you to do Berry Street lessons per se. We're asking you to integrate the Berry Street work, the trauma-informed practices into everything that you do. Now, interestingly, people do take the time now to do specific explicit teaching of stamina, of, conflict resolution, of resilience. Many of those things are explicit teaching lessons, but that is through the understanding of this is what the kids need. We need to teach the kids what their emotions are, what self-regulation looks like, what co-regulation looks like. But the impetus to do that is come through the greater understanding of trauma, its impacts and strategies to address it, and the recognition of the need. So there isn't the pushback now about, oh gosh, this is extra work. The understanding is this is the work. And this is the work that is going to help not just the children in our care, but us in managing our classrooms and our play spaces and our relationships with all people.
That's very powerful. Thanks, Deb. Nadia, your view.
Well, I agree with both Tom and Deb, and I was having a conversation with Tom outside earlier and just saying the complexities in early childhood, the inconsistencies with staff, but at the end of the day, when I come to work and I see my team, we've all got the same goal and we're all there for those children. And if it means that we do an extra thing, we do an extra thing. If we come together for an extra meeting, we do that. But essentially, I feel that I've got quite a diverse team. So I've got educators that have been there, teachers for 20 plus years, and I've got new grad dips or, Cert 3s coming on board, and seeing the difference in my leadership, I suppose, into guiding them to become best educators for the children, but then meeting them where they're at the same time for the children too. I know that when we do come together, it's for that same goal. It's for the children. So I think maybe my barriers would be just the lack of maybe consistency that I see, I suppose, and maybe what kind of trauma practice they've had previously. Yeah.
When we were talking outside too, I was talking to Tom earlier, and we were saying in some settings where a teacher has just started at a school and they've undertaken Berry Street strength-based model training, but no one else has, and they feel quite alone. Maybe you want to elaborate a bit on that, Tom?
Couple of ideas. I want us to see what we're doing with instructional practices as dual purpose instruction, that we can teach content and well-being at the same time. That helps us manage what a social worker would say is service rationing, that we're constantly rationing our time, money, energy, staffing. It feels like we don't have enough, and the reasons are we don't have enough. We're working in communities like Doveton. We're working in communities that we owe the best of what we have, because these are communities with long-standing impacts of intergenerational inequity. So yes, we don't have enough. But for the teacher who feels very alone, I want you to know that you, in a sense, are working towards change from the bottom up, from the bottom of your classroom. You can be a lighthouse for your students, and you can help develop practices that can serve as living examples of trauma-informed education for your school. And of course, if you have a teacher next door to you across the hall who starts understanding, oh, what are you doing in there? Then that starts creating partnerships for learning, and then those can grow to communities of practice. And at Doveton, they've set up a special room called the Action Research Room where groups of teachers are working together to develop this stuff. That is awesome. And often in trauma-informed education, we talk about regulation for learning from the bottom up. So from the top down, I can think clearly, I can make decisions I want to. I see the same thing in terms of implementation across the school and across the system. That bottom up, we need hardworking teachers who are willing to try it and do it and just fail sometimes and keep going. But from the top down, of course, it's so important to have leaders like Deb, and of course our district and regional level leaders and departmental leaders creating an authorizing environment from the top down. That's a long journey, but that's why we're here today.
Okay. Well, in the room, you've got people who are alumni, you've got people who are teacher educators. What would you say to them, I think, in terms of what can we all be doing, to strengthen, what the shared goal is here in terms of trauma-informed and strength-based education? What can schools, teacher education institutions be doing, for example? Nadia, let's start with you, for example. I mean, even before you answer that, are all of your educators and teachers, are they trained in trauma-informed education? No? Do you wish they were?
Yes.
And
I'm a current student in trauma education, responsive education, and just having so many years, going on to 17 years in this sector in early childhood, just seeing how it's changed, but how much, where I've gone in my journey and how much I needed to have a bit more to lead my team, to lead the staff. So I say, there needs to be a little bit more, I suppose, whether it's those little extra courses that we know that are more available, that, they're a bit more communicated with these smaller services or these smaller early years managers saying, hey, there's this out there, let's get our team to do this. Because they've got the same goal, they've got the same vision for those children at the end of the day. And like I was saying to Tom, we're seeing a lot more. I've seen a lot more since I started many, many years ago to now of that trauma and how educators, and that's where we get the burnout in the educators, that secondary trauma as well, I suppose, for them. I know I've experienced some of it in my role as a leader because you show up every day for your team and you kind of have to put that face on, that hat on to be there for them. And it's, you forget about yourself. You go home, you've got to do it again. It's kind of similar to like a mundane thing, I would say. And it wasn't until two of my educators come up to me the next day and said to me, are you okay? After what had happened the day before. And I went, oh, actually, no, I'm not. But I've never thought about it because I was more worried about my team and what they needed as such. So I think having that access, having that support for them as well, there's only so much that I can do as a leader for them, I suppose. But yeah.
And Deb, we've made, Nadia's alluded to, some quite significant issues there in relation to potentially not staying in the workforce. We know there's a workforce shortage in early childhood education, there's a workforce shortage in primary teaching, there's a workforce shortage in secondary teaching. What's your view? Do you think this is likely to...
There's a workforce shortage, and folks, I'm desperate for a PE teacher. So I feel like I have the right audience and absolutely the right lead-in for that. So
we've got a few PE coordinators in here, so we'll stitch one up for you.
Outstanding, because I'm not joking. I'm absolutely serious. I am. So I was going to say a few kind of unrelated, they're related, but they're not necessarily connected as eloquently as Tom would. So I think if you were to come into an organisation like Doveton, like our community is characterised by lots of drug and alcohol abuse, lots of family violence, lots of food insecurity, housing insecurity, generational poverty, and lots of refugees and asylum seekers. It's a very disadvantaged community. And if you were to come into Doveton without a framework of trauma-informed practice, without an awareness of it, and also without an openness to learn about it, life would be really difficult. It would be a really hard place to work. So the trauma-informed work that we've been doing since 2016 is when we started doing it, is absolutely essential for our children but also for our staff, and particularly in that retention piece. And I don't really want to talk about COVID, but remember during COVID, lots of bad things happened. Lots of people were really stressed and anxious. Interestingly enough, our kids weren't. Our kids dealt with COVID really well. The best attitudes to school survey data we've ever gotten was during COVID, but our staff didn't. Staff were really stressed and anxious. And so we pivoted our Berry Street work at that time to focus more on staff, and we used the trauma-informed work, really targeting staff and staff wellbeing and building their resilience and their tolerance. So I guess in terms of like the workforce, we had the capacity to do that, we had the tools to do it, and we could do it quickly because we had some of that foundational stuff in place and really did target the benefits for staff at that time. Great results out of that. And, you know, again, from an understanding of trauma as well. So people bought into that really well, and it was helpful. The other thing I was going to say is if you go to our website, it says we use the Berry Street education model. We actually have people who apply for jobs with us, and, you know, when we get to the interview, they say, oh, I'm really drawn to your school because I see you use the Berry Street education model. So that's a really positive thing. And also for me, when I'm recruiting, it's like, okay, here's somebody who understands not the model, but the need for it, you know, so that's important. And we have questions in our interviewing around trauma-informed practice that don't presuppose you're an expert in it, but what we're looking for is people who are attuned to that, like people who have, you know, kind of an emotional disposition that says, I have unconditional positive regard, you know, even if they have not necessarily formally trained. And I think the other thing, which may or may not be related to the direct question, when we've been doing this work since 2016, so we've done not the 4 days for every single person because that's hard when you've got staff turning over, but regularly we're doing training for all our staff, and that's everybody, not just teachers, that's support staff, the administration team, everybody's doing that work. So there's many things in our school culture that we've forgotten are Berry Street things. It's just part of our culture now. So when new people come in, assuming that they have the disposition, which we kind of try to get through the interview, it's very easy to come into that culture. So we had a panel a few years ago of teachers. It was a Berry Street open day. Loads of people came, had a panel of teachers, and they were asking questions of the teachers. What they couldn't tell were who were new teachers to the school, who were graduates, and who were people who'd been there for a long time. So for me, what that said is we'd managed to develop that culture where it didn't matter the amount of experience or training that you had. You could be part of a culture that was strong enough to promote really good practices in this space and really good values and practices around those values. So I didn't answer the question.
No, you have, and then some. So very, very powerful. And look, I'm going to open it up to the audience in a few minutes. So have your questions ready. But before we do, we'll just come back to Tom. Yeah. If you could change something? I mean, I've got an audience with a minister in 2 weeks, Minister Carroll.
I have notes for you, Damien.
Yeah, so, well, give me some notes, Tom.
So in our work with leaders and systems leaders, we've been talking a lot about progression narratives. It's something that I've been writing a lot about, and it anchors our research, particularly in our new work around trauma-informed leadership. And a progression narrative is a story that you tell yourself about what's going on around here. And it's a story that groups of people tell themselves about the purposes of their work together, narratively progressing forward. I'd like to suggest that what we need to do, please do this, Damien, is dispel any myths around what trauma-informed education is and isn't. Unfortunately, we still have people who are quite naive, that's me being really rude, that they think, oh, are you teaching teachers to diagnose trauma? No. Are we teaching teachers to pathologize students and label students? No. What we're saying is your progression narrative is that trauma-informed education is necessary for some, and our research is showing useful for all. And I learned this many years ago, that when we teach strategies like you got to move and learn at the same time, you've got to be able to manage your focus in bite-sized chunks as teachers instructionally, you can do all these things to develop stamina for learning for children who give up after 7 minutes. What we know is that progression narratives toward change require a teacher to think of both the person who needs it with tier 3 or tier 2 needs, but also think of those important statistics I dropped down at the beginning of our time together. We don't know when some young people will need these strategies, and our research is sharing that the kid that looks like they're super focused and doing everything you want them to do and asking for extra credit, those are the same young people in our studies who say, I'm using those strategies, but I'm using them at home, at the bus, online. I'm taking care of myself. So we don't often see all of the impacts in our classrooms, if that's important. I got to say one more thing about teacher well-being that you can also one of my research interests is staff and teacher well-being. And thank you for bringing up the impacts of secondary and vicarious stress. I'd also add the impacts of compassion fatigue. The other side of that is compassion satisfaction and the vicarious post-traumatic growth, which is when we see someone who's struggling growing, we as educators also grow. So I know that every single one of us here would care a lot about teacher well-being. And the good news is part of our progression narrative right now is student well-being and teacher well-being may be the same thing. That if we are modeling adulthood for our students, the students are echoing back to us. When students do well, we do well. When students are growing, we are growing. And I, like you, are supporting teachers by sometimes giving them fun barbecue after school or a bit of time to get together and experience something good together. Let's call that positive emotion. We need to remember we're human beings, we like each other. But if we return back to class the next day and we don't have strategies to help students learn, then the progression narrative toward learning falls apart a little bit. And I know when I was a teacher, I didn't have any of this stuff. So my well-being was tanking. So our studies are showing that when teachers are enacting these things, just like the staff at Doveton, that their own sense of workplace efficacy, their sense of resilience at work and the sort of meaning they derive every day, that also increases. So you got to do the strategies to take care of yourself so you can take care of the kiddos.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tom. Let's have some questions. If you want to pop up your hand and shout it out, maybe. I don't know everyone's name, unfortunately, sorry. So maybe let us know your name. Wanty's just rushing to get a microphone.
I think one of the things that hasn't been touched on here is how we incorporate our families and our parents. And a lot of our students talk about the fact they don't get that experience because they're pre-service teachers. So, yeah, what is the role of parents and families?
I've spent this week, for a whole lot of reasons, meeting mostly with families this week. And one of the things that's really important, if I said to any of my families, oh, how are your kids going with the Berry Street education model, they would look at me like I was from Mars. They would have no clue. And even most of our kids would have no clue if we said, you know, what's your views on the Berry Street education model, which I think is great, right? I think that's good because the work we're doing is embedded in our practice and our conversations, the way we act and behave, and it's not needing to be labelled. What I reflected on at the end of a couple of challenging meetings was the very foundations that are going on there. You know, we're talking about strength-based, we're talking about growing kids, you know, can't do this yet. You know, next steps, building stamina, building resilience, and a lot of conversations that I had about not today and tomorrow, but the long term. You know, it's not going to work every time, but it'll work over time. Those kind of things. So I think it's really important for us to be having same conversations with families as what we're having with children. You don't have to label it as anything in particular. I'm not sure families would be excited except if I said, I'm about to implement some trauma-informed strategies on you. But when you have
don't do that.
No. But when you have a conversation about, yet this is what we're seeing, this is what we're moving to, and this is how we're going to help you about building stamina. And also, you know what? We do a thing at the end of each term, a success showcase, where we do a little sort of case study on kids, only 2 minutes, where staff have to come in and talk about moments of joy maybe. What brought you joy this term, which is where you can talk about those stories that have filled your soul as well as the child. And it's also important that we're sharing them with mums and dads and parents and carers. Because they don't see all those. Like, what kid goes home and says, I had a joyful day today because I managed to do something, I managed to stay in class for the whole lesson. This is a really important thing, but we need to be sharing them with parents because this is all part of the journey and part of the yet. So for us, those strengths-based conversations are really important and are embedded in so many other things that aren't necessarily Berry Street, like your education, your individual improvement plans, your behaviour support plans. Our kids all have ready-to-learn plans. That's all built in there, and they're all tools that we use in the classroom, but also tools that we share with families that they're part of as well.
Wonderful. And, I was thinking the point you made earlier too, 6 months to 15 years, I mean, that's incredible, isn't it, when you put it that way? I had never thought about it that way. But, the children in Doveton, some of them, for that is their life. So, Nadia, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's, well, we've made a rule where I know in a world that we're using so much technology, is to put that technology away and have those conversations with the parents, share those things with the parents. I remember I asked the early years manager who I with for a policy and an education support plan to help me with my studies, and I had to critique it, and it was new. So it was great for me to do that, but I was like, there's that disconnection, there's that we're not having with families on this. This is a new document. This is something that my team has to then learn. I then have to support my team, but I have to support my team through those conversations on something fairly new that they've got to deliver to a family. So my important thing is just putting away that iPad that's non-existent. You're there for the children. You're there focusing on them, having those conversations. Because we're open from 7 o'clock to 6 o'clock, one of those educators in that room will always see the families to have that conversation. And it's just as simple as, hey, how did they sleep last night, essentially, and that would determine a whole thing. So I think, just having those real connections that way rather than this is their day, they've had a good day, put a few photos up and that's it.
Thanks, Nadia. Tom, your thoughts on?
I'm excited to share that in November, we are publishing a new book of research, and one of those chapters is called Trauma-Informed Parent Engagement. We're very happy to do parent talks and stuff like that. I deal with that stuff, but I like it even better when schools are sharing trauma-informed education strategies, it doesn't matter what you call it, but strategies to help build routines and rhythms for home-school partnerships. And it's been awesome to track some of the schools in our studies as they're sharing these strategies that we're doing in the classroom. And slowly parents are coming back and saying, you know what? They're doing the strategy slightly different at home or in their bedrooms or in our dining room table, but they're doing them. And so that kind of homeschool connection is super important. I also can't help but give advice to our teachers in here. Every single time that you need to write or talk to parents about a rough day or a rough moment, let's call that politely a rupture moment, but you and I both know what I'm talking about. It's very important, I think, from our research to know that parents must hear what's going well with their kid, what's right with their kid, what strengths do their kids have. And I would suggest a sentence starter like, we know that your child has the strength of kindness and they have the strength of fairness. But today was not their day. We want to increase the strengths that they have, and we're here for their strengths. So you can see I can be accurate, but I also can ensure that I'm framing things in a way that parents are reminded that we see their children's strengths.
It's kind of on my mind because I'm actually reading a book by Gabor Mate, who is a kind of global authority on trauma. And of course, his view is that trauma is universal, so that everyone has suffered trauma as at a primordial level in the course of being a child, and separation from mother, all those kind of things, means that in a sense, every single person is traumatized to a certain degree. And it just kind of, what I would put out there, I'm still not sure what the extent of the concept of trauma is that we're operating with here. Are we seeing it as an exception to be applied to a certain categorized number of children? Or are we going to go with the kind of, I suppose, more sort of existentially challenging vision of Gabor Mate's book? And Gabor Mate, I think it's, in Lacanian psychoanalysis, that would be how it's read, right? As simply everyone has been traumatized. So from that point of view, then, could one just normalize trauma and, in a sense, almost delete the word and just say we are dealing with varying constitutions of damage in the classroom, and that this has to become part of the kind of ontological constitution of the classroom itself. Sorry, it's a bit terrible, pompous way of putting it, but
I'm ready.
I thought you might be ready for that.
I'm ready because my PhD. So I've been hiding something the whole time for you, my friend. Because I like to cloak myself as a super practical person, and I am a very practical person, but I'll try and speak your language. So my PhD was looking at the existential meaning that educators are trying to derive when working with very, very vulnerable children. That existentialness is absolutely something important to all of us. So let's acknowledge that, and I certainly appreciate what you said. Then I get back to the daily work of a teacher. And a teacher, I think you'd agree, doesn't want to actually hear this conversation right now, but they will when they want to. But I would say if I am waking up and I've got to get my lessons done for 30 people, then that is a thing I have to think about. I would suggest again that we are not diagnosing or labeling trauma. In fact, that is the province of someone that is much more skilled in therapeutic modalities than I am. I'm an educator. I'm an education researcher. I'm not a clinician. But I also know what it looks like when someone doesn't know how to meet their needs in healthy ways or proactive ways. And I would suggest, based on our research, that resilient children are three things. They are flexible. They can manage changes in their schedule, changes in their day. The kids I work with in out-of-home care, they are not so flexible on some days. They let you have it. They go from 0 to 100 in 2 seconds. Game over for the rest of the day. So that's flexibility. The second thing is accuracy, that I want children to look at a rupture and say, oh, I might have caused that. Therefore, I need to be part of the repair. So that's an accurate way to see the world, that I've contributed to a rupture. That's a thing. And then, of course, the third definition is meeting your own needs in healthy ways. So if I'm looking at groups of people who, I'll go with your assumption, that we've all experienced stress overload. None of us have experienced the perfect childhood, let's say. I also know that resilience is a journey. And as all of us in this room have experienced that journey, we have had to journey toward flexibility, accuracy, meeting our own needs in healthy ways. That threefold definition of resilience helps me as a practical person to think, today I see someone not meeting their own needs in healthy ways. So in what we're thinking a lot about, certainly at Doveton, is how do you help children understand their own bodies, understand their own escalation, and then proactively get their hand up to say, hey, teacher, you've got about 2 hot seconds to help me before I take things into my own hand. They use their own language with that. That's meeting your own needs in healthy ways. So what are all the communication tools and strategies to get that support so you can manage that stress and this universal sense of trauma? By the way, universal sense of trauma. I hold 2 passports. And the passport I hold to that other country, the United States of America, yeah, it's very important. And that's why I'm so proud to be an Australian, because this conversation is not happening in government schools in many, many states right now in America. And you can see why this is critical as a progression narrative for education.
No, well, we feel your pain on that last point too. But really good question.
Can I just add a couple of things, sort of, a bit more, not at such a high level, but, if you think about it in the classroom, the thing that's great about the strength-based approach, about the trauma-informed practice, is it's inclusive. So it's about inclusion for everybody. So wherever you are on that sliding scale, and it is a scale, these practices are going to embrace you and allow you to succeed. So one of the things that I would say this every day, it's a Berry Street thing, everyone gets what they need to succeed. And so you're on that continuum somewhere, you're going to get what you need if it's done right. And I think that's really important. The other thing that I was going to say too is this all connects so beautifully with the work of teaching and learning. And so one of the challenges that I forgot to mention is that some people think at system levels, at sophisticated thinkers are like, ooh, this is, touchy-feely, plaiting hair, having a cup of tea. It's not. Like, the work in this space is about the learning, whether it's social emotional learning or whether it's academic learning, it is very much about the learning. And this year for me has been, one of the great things this year has been the absolute transparency of the links between wellbeing and learning and the connection between explicit teaching, the patterns and routines in explicit teaching, and how they are so supportive of trauma-informed practices. So the connection there has never been stronger, and thus the benefit for everybody doing this work in the classroom has never been more obvious, because you're getting, double bang for your buck, which is creating that inclusive space for everybody. Everybody gets what they need to succeed. The dosage for some is more, the intensity for some is more, but everybody's getting something.
No, very good questions. Nadia, did you have any thoughts you want to add there?
I don't know. I don't know if I can top that, to be honest. I think it's just overall looking at just the bigger scope of things, and I didn't realise until I started studying this that I think we do all have a little bit of trauma in us somehow. And I think for me it's being aware of that now, that I have to go in different maybe with a certain educator if they're, might be a little situation that's happened, but it could be I've got to deal with it different because maybe that's triggering something right now. I don't need to ask, but I need to be there to support. And I think that's the same with the children. Unfortunately, my under threes don't put their hand up and tell us you've got 2 seconds to get to me. It would already happen.
Well, no, and I think, it's a challenge, certainly a really important challenge to, the notion that we could normalise this notion of trauma. But, one other possibility, just to add my 2 cents worth, is to talk to teachers, school leaders, and, if you were to develop a list of what they see as trauma, through their children and what that looks like, I think at the end of the day there would be a very clear differentiation. Maybe someone needs to do that work. How much of what is experienced by young people through, their involvement in learning that teachers see, that school leaders see, that's not normal in many cases. To have someone die in your family is normal. There's trauma that comes with that. To be beaten up, by your spouse, or be to hurt or harmed by members of your community, that's trauma. I think there's a challenging piece of work there, so we don't, I suppose, undervalue the word trauma. But that is certainly the risk when we start to use language much more systemically and broadly. So really important conversation. But I think it would be interesting to see the neuroscience view of this point as well. Psychologists and neuroscientists would probably add another level, again, in terms of the brain and the science behind, the difference that it makes, certainly. And remembering that teachers' jobs is about helping their students learn and grow. So from that point of view, I think it's a good question, Simon, and one that I think we should hold carefully and consider as we move forward, because the sort of trauma we're talking about, the experiences that children have been through and had, many of them impacts the way they learn in their opportunities for learning. And for many of those young people, that stays with them for the rest of their lives. And so the difference that a teacher makes, through something as simple, and it's not simple, but the strategies for a strength-based trauma-informed model can make the difference for the future of a child in that sense. So I can see you're itching, Tom.
For some people, the words trauma-informed or trauma-aware education just doesn't work for them. And I'm not going to argue with that. It's fine. But I would suggest that every single one of us is experiencing stress. Some of us experience stress overload. And there are lots of reasons why we as human beings experience stress overload. So one of the reasons I am a researcher in trauma-informed education is it's unifying the messages to practical strategies for what we can do to manage stress in a world that is more complex, more volatile, more uncertain, etc. That this idea of managing stress for learning, that's in our work now called high expectations. And I think we're nearing the end. So I'd like my final message I want to share is high expectations. I used to think when I was a teacher was walking around with a clipboard saying, tuck in your shirt, do your homework, stop doing that. I have high expectations for you. And now I realize high expectations is for us as educators to hold students steady, to offer feedback and strategies, and to keep searching and learning and adding one more tool to our toolkit. That's high expectations for ourselves.
Thanks, Tom. Deb, final words from you and Nadia?
My message is around, what I said. This is not just about looking after kids and their well-being. It's about looking after kids, their well-being, their learning and their futures. Hope and optimism for me is a really important part of our work in the Berry Street model, and engendering that into our kids, giving them the confidence, the hope and the optimism to want to grow and want to succeed. And so I think it's really important that this work is viewed very holistically around well-being and learning, and what comes first, what comes second, who knows? Everybody's different, but you can't separate the two, and if you try to separate the two, there is a problem. It is going to be hard work and it will be perceived as more work. But when you can integrate really closely how you're supporting the well-being of everybody, kids and grown-ups, when you can integrate that with the learning, that's when you get the synergy, and that's also when you get the joy and the success.
Thanks, Deb. Nadia, you've now got the final word, so no pressure.
Okay. I think families are essentially leaving their babies, their children with us as their first carers. They haven't been anywhere before. It's there from birth to 5, 6. Sometimes they stay before they move to school. We've got to essentially build that trust and just be there, be in the moment for those children, for those families. And I think as an early educator, it's just ensuring that the support's there for them, for the staff, for the children. They're just children. They're going to behave and play, but just being present in that moment, I think, is really important, especially for those younger ones. And they don't know what's going on. They can't grasp the concept of what's happening in the world around them. We struggle as adults, let alone a child, to understand that. So I think,
And we know the first 1,000 days of a child's life makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it? So let's put our hands together and thank our panel for the stimulating conversation and the challenge.